Hey, Magic friends, welcome back to the channel. This is your captain speaking here on Captain Clyde's MTG. We're back today. We're going to talk about all the Phyrexian Old B1 leaks, new cards that are coming out from this weekend that are going to affect, in my opinion, the new and budding standard format. These cards are the ones I think are going to be big players. Now, with that said, there's lots of stuff coming up, deck archetypes, and the whole 9 yards that we could talk about. I'm not going to get too far into that, but I think these are going to be the cards that are really going to shape the future of the standard format and have some of the biggest impacts in what we see as new decks come out. So, with that being said, before we get started, don't forget to subscribe. If you have, I do appreciate it. So let's get started with our honorable mention. We have two today. Uh, the two honorable mentions, we have the first one, we have the Phyrexian Vindicator. This 5/5 for 4 white that flies is insane for the mono white decks. And if you deal damage to it, you prevent that damage, and then that damage that's prevented is dealt to any other target. That includes your opponents. This is going to be a big player, probably as the top end of mono white decks. Now, why is it only honorable mention? Well, a lot of stuff that kills things in standard, in particular, doesn't deal damage. And a 5/5 that flies probably means it ain't blocking or being blocked. It might block if you get ahead of it, but um, yeah, there's just too many ways to kill this that don't deal damage, which means that this thing won't be able to use its ability. However, 4 white for a 5/5 flyer is good enough for honorable mentions. It may be good enough just to win some of the games. And if it just stands in the way of something. The other honorable mention card, is if you couldn't guess it, is the other 4 mana card, the Phyrexian Obliterator reprint. This bad boy is a 5/5 with trample, and if a source would deal damage to the Obliterator, that source's controller sacrifices that many permanents. Very similar to the white card, except they sacrifice permanents much better, but again, it falls prey to the same problem the other card does. In standard, many of the things that are going to kill this will not deal damage to it. It will just destroy it, meaning they don't have to sacrifice any permanents. Now, with that being said, if you come across a creature fight deck, you definitely will win. But even those decks have removal that doesn't deal damage. So, only honorable mention for the white and black mono beasts, which I still think will be players. They just won't be as good because of the format. So, starting it off now, we'll go with number 5 on the list. Number 5, we have the Armored Scrap Gorger. This is probably the best mana dork that we have. So it's a green and 1 for an 0/3. Great for a blocker. 2 mana on the normal mana dork cost these days, especially for standard. It gets +3/+0 as long as it has 3 oil counters on it. So you tap it to add a mana of any color, and when it becomes tapped, you exile a card from a graveyard and put an oil counter on Scrap Gorger. So tapping this for mana makes it become a 3/3. So late game, if you don't need the mana, now it's a beater. Also, it has the ability, you can tap it for mana and snipe cards out of the graveyards out from under any kind of graveyard recursion effects. This, I think, is going to be a powerhouse. It has so many great abilities on it. It can be a 3/3 beater eventually. It starts out as a mana dork, which you probably need, and has the ability to empty out a graveyard while you're just doing your thing. This, I think, is really an undersold card, which is why it's number 5 on the list, because if you're playing green, you're going to be playing this. Moving on to number 4 on the list, we have Black Sun's Twilight. All the Sun Twilight cards are great in their own sense. I've picked this one in particular because this is one that does actually target a creature and can kill it out from indestructible without doing damage. Also, it can be used at any mana cost to kill that creature. But if you spend 6 on it, you can get a card out of your graveyard that's a creature and put it straight on the battlefield, which could be an amazing swing of a 2-for-1. Kill a creature, get one back. It's also an instant. You could do it at the end of someone's turn. It's not a sorcery like some of the other ones. This, I think, will be the powerhouse of the Twilight decks in Standard. So, moving on, next we have number 3. That's right, she's back, she's mean, she's green, and she's been completed. It's Nissa, the Ascended Animist. Yes, this thing is 7 mana. Yes, this thing costs a lot. But let's be honest, for 5 mana and 4 life, you can lay this thing as a 5/5 and then make a 6/6 with it. That is just absurd. Not to mention when it comes into play, you could also just destroy artifacts or enchantments. And if you happen to have a bunch of mana because, oh god, you're playing green, why would you? All of a sudden, your creatures get +1/+1 for every forest you control and gain trample, and you accidentally kill your opponent. Yeah, this is going to be in every mean green deck, especially because of the ramp. I see this getting played at 7 mana, at 5 mana, at 6 mana. I mean, maybe you spend 3 green and only 2 life. Um, Either way, this is going to be a powerhouse card. This is just like the old 5 mana Nissa we had before that turned lands into creatures. It doesn't double mana, but it doesn't have to because it just spits out big fat nappies. So, moving on, we have a number 2 on the list today. It is another Planeswalker. It is the Eternal Wanderer. And I know a lot of people hate been talking about this card, especially for number 2, but hear me out. Other than the fact the art on this is really ugly, but we'll get past that. 2 white and 4. This thing has no more than one creature can attack this card each combat. +1, exile up to one target artifact or creature. Return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next player's end step. Good for blink decks. 0, make a 2/2 Samurai that has double strike, basically deals 4 damage. And -4, which is the big one here, for 6 mana, you can do it as soon as you lay it. Each player chooses one creature that player controls. Each player sacrifices all creatures they control not chosen this way. This is very reminiscent of Elspeth back in the day, except not only does it have a Wrath, it doesn't make 3/1/1s, which is, I'm not going to say uh, definitely better than this card, but the static effect, the plus effect, it does make a 2/2. I think blue, white, white control, white plus X control, this will be a big player in the format, especially if we start seeing cards or see a format go more toward a creature beatdown scenario. Especially if we start splashing green and we're playing this thing, we're playing Nissa, we're playing the Mana Dork that becomes a 3/3, can kill things. Like, there's lots of ways that this can get out of hand, and just a 1 or a 2 of, especially in a control deck, can be devastating. I don't think we've given this card enough credit yet, and people haven't realized it, but I think this will be a powerhouse in Standard. So, with that said, we've talked about all the cards now. Honorable mentions all the way up to number 2. Moving on to number 1, the card with the most impact in Standard. That's right, it's Skrelv's Hive. A white and a 1 enchantment. Beginning of your upkeep, lose 1 life, create a 1/1 colorless Phyrexian Might artifact creature token with Toxic that can't block. Where have we heard this somewhere before? Oh yeah, Bitter Blossom. Now, in comparison, this is not as good as Bitter Blossom for the fact that these creatures don't fly and they can't block. The Bitter Blossom tokens could block, so the 1 life you lost could mitigate a big 2/2 or 3/3 creature swing. Um, but also Corrupted, as long as the opponent has 3 or more poison counters, creature you control have Toxic and have lifelink, can be a big deal. Also, this is a 2 mana enchantment that honestly any white Winnie deck would love. Matter of fact, this is probably better than Wedding Invitation because if you're playing the vampire that's a 2/3 that when a 1/1 or 2 power or less creature comes to the battlefield, draw a card, this thing does it every turn, but you lose a life. The Wedding Invitation only does it if you don't attack with 2 or more creatures, and only until it flips. This thing does it forever. Plus, there's all kinds of white weenie things that can pump this. There's a Lord. I just believe that with the white decks out there that they are, and the mono white synergies, I think not only will we see this card in Standard played heavily in a white deck, I think we will also see this card in maybe even modern or older formats just because. I mean, think about it. Under the right conditions, this would be an amazing sideboard card for Modern Infect. Like, this card has just amazing. This card's got lots of legs. Get it? Lots of legs. Anyway, so this is number one for me on the list. Um, if you don't agree, that's fine. Tell me in the comments down below what you think. And as always, links in the description to eBay and Patreon. Don't forget until next time to be kind. And as always, it is pre-release weekend, and I hope I got to see you across from the game table.